Yeah, g'day guys. Today on the channel, we're adapting the torque converter to fit the flex plate of the 360. So here we go. Okay, so here's the torque converter, spinny thing. It was out of a running car and apparently it's all okay-ish, hopefully. So I'll drain the rest of the oil out. I did tip it out to make sure there was no metal filings or anything in there. But the oil was pretty black. So I'll drain the rest of that out. It's kind of funny, like the guy I bought it from said, yeah, the guy came and bought the transmission and everything. Yeah, like I mean, that transmission is going to need a rebuild. Because with black oil, that means the clutch bands are burnt and all sorts of other stuff. Anyway, we're going to, I'll just get the engine crane and unhook the transmission from the motor. The motor will sit there on the trolley and I'll unhook, like put a sling around the end and put a sling around the middle, and we'll unhook that, get it all apart, put it all in there. So the seals should be still pretty good, because like even this end seal is okay. It's in relatively good nick, so I'm just expecting the one on the other end to be okay and go from there. So let's get this apart and tidy the shaft up and put the old torque converter on, and then we got to try and work out the flex plate, which could be another problem. But anyway, let's get into that, eh? You're probably all wondering, why didn't I remove the starter motor to do that whole exercise? Reason was, there's a bolt. There it is. So, and it was like under the motor. So that was very difficult to do, to unbolt the starter. I should have lifted the whole thing off and unbolted it. But see, I wouldn't have been able to do it if the flex plate was in place, because of that plate in there, because it would be on the other side. Anyway, so that's all off. I'll take that starter off, and I just got to remember, if I'm ever trying to separate it, I'll make sure the starter's not in place. So let's give that a bit of a lift, unbolt the starter and clean up that shaft so we can get this torque converter on. Anyway, here we go. I've cleaned up the shaft, all the splines, bit of steel wool, bit of a vacuum while I was still wooling. Come up pretty tidy actually. I was surprised there was a bit of gunk in the end, but it's all come out all right, which is nice with the vacuum. So let's throw this torque converter on. I've got the motor suspended off the crane and the flex plates all torqued up. It's ready to go. Yeah, so I've got the transmission sitting on the bench here as level as it can be, and I've got the shaft all cleaned up. It's all tidied. I've actually checked the torque converter to make sure it fits, and it does. Yes, no trouble. It's drained of black burnty sort of oil. So I'll put I normally fill them up, like put a litre or so inside the hole there before I install them, but I'll do that before we put it all together for the last time. So what I've actually got to do, the problem that we have, that series of holes right there, so there's two sets of holes. That's for different torque converters for different model cars that the AMC sort of have. One of them is meant to be for a 727, but we don't have a 727 transmission, so I've got to make another set, which is actually a bit smaller, like in diameter. So it's still 4 bolts like this one, but it's not, it doesn't line up. So, but the center does, all the center and everything fits perfectly. So we're going to, it's a bit of mucking around, but I'll take you along for the ride, because it's certainly worth learning how to do. Now here's the little bolts torque converter, but I've made one with a little pointy thing on it, with actually sort of like a center punch, if you can see that. All the others just screw in, which is normal, and this one I've made, so I'll put this in one of them, one of the bolt holes. Hang on, I'll put the torque converter on. Hang on a second. There we go. That was the last one. We're in. Anyway, so you can see these 4 little mounts. So I'll grab me a little duty wad here and thread it in left-handed. There we go. So that's all the way in. So this here will fit nicely into the back of the crank, and this we can have it located down here somewhere, And then when I bring the whole motor and everything into it, and then just pull this torque converter out to meet it so the center is in the right spot, then I can just give it a little scratch and do the first hole, if that makes sense. There's a bit of a process, and then you pull the engine back off and you drill the hole in the flex plate, because there'll be a mark somewhere here. I want to try and do it in between this set of series of holes, but there's a big counterweight. There's a big counterweight right there to balance this flex plate, so I'll have to sort of do it next to it on either side of a bit of mucking around. But if the flex plate is the right one for the motor, but it's not the right one for the torque converter, you've got to make your own. So that's what I'm doing. Let's get this motor into place and get these holes sorted, eh? Here we go. Okay, so I've got it sitting in there. It's really hard to see. Can you see that little shiny thing on the end of that square block? Well, that's that little pointy that's our little scriber. I'll just move the torque converter back towards the flex plate, which is this ring gear. See the gears here? So I will just move it back to there and put a little mark there, and then I can separate it again and drill a hole. And just got to do it 4 times, that's all. But at least they'll all be in the right spot. Each time I'll do another bolt up and it'll be perfect. So the torque converter is located on the center, the bell housing's all located, everything's located. It just needs those holes re-drilled or drilled to suit that. So I will just give it a little mark and then we can separate it again. So here we go. Okay, so we have a little mark. You can just see it right there. So now I just give it a real center punch and drill a hole. The right diameter for these bolts, which are the actual ones that go into the doodad there. It's lots of mucking around, so just that 4 times. Pretty easy, really. Yeah. Anyway, so I'll drill a hole and we'll be right. Here we go. Okay, I've come across a snag. I'm up to 1, 2, 3 holes so far. I'm about to do the 4th one, and I kind of noticed these little alloy filings there. Hang on, let's have a better look. See, they're sort of like iron filings, but alloy. Anyway, I worked out where it's from. See the little bumps in there? There's another one right there. There's 2 spots that it's rubbing against. You can just see the edge of the teeth. There's a little bit of shininess on them. I might just touch it up with the grinder in there and give it some clearance. There's plenty of room out here, so if I take a mill off on the inside, it should be fine. And then I'll know where we're at. So I'll give them a touch up, and then we'll put it together again one more time for the last bolt, and then we're ready. So let's get into that. Here we go. For more precise engineering tips, follow me on Instagram. Now we've got a problem. The torque converter needs a spacer to go from there to the little tabs on the torque converter itself, so the little 4 bolts can connect to. Now the only problem is those little bolts aren't long enough to start with, because they're the factory ones, to install this transmission into, or up to the 4 litre. The Jeep motor, where this is the 360 AMC, which also came out in a Jeep, but not with this transmission. But the all bolt pattern is the same. The flex plate fits inside the bell housing now, after a few little modifications. So the torque converter, when it's pushed right up, and you give it about 4 to 5 mil pull out after you've clicked it in the 3 stages, because the torque converter needs to go right up so it connects to the 2 splines on the drive shaft plus the oil pump. So anyway, once all those are all slipped in and where they're supposed to be, you can pull out the torque converter out of the transmission 4 or 5 mil without any trouble. And the only problem is you can't quite see it in there. Oh, there we go. And you can see that there is a gap, if it'll focus on it, between that little square block and the flex plate. And it's about 9 mil. So what I'm doing is making some little spaces and just getting along the bolts. It's the only real way I can get around it. So as you saw, I was milling that down on the old mill over there, the wind-up mill with the grinder, and I've drilled a hole all the way through that suits them all. So I haven't actually put a square on it, but I'm kind of bringing it down to the final size on the mill. Don't really need to. I'm pretty sure they're pretty close to all being the same, so I need 4 of them. So there was 4 little 10 mil, it was 10 mil flat bar, like this one. It's just 10 mil flat bar. So I've just made it into 25 by 25 spaces by 10 mil thick. So there's one there, that's the edge one. So I've just got to bust these apart. I've only tack welded them all together. So I'll bust them all apart and just put the old deburr tool on and give them all a tidy up. So then I've got 4 spaces that should be virtually the same weight. I haven't actually put them on a scale or a balance or anything as yet, but I'm pretty sure they'll all be the same, or within 0.2 of a gram, which I don't think is going to matter with this setup, because it's not a high performance, high revving engine. This is going to be lucky to get 4,000 RPM because it's all going to be torque, not revs. I'll just bust these apart and give them all a little tidy up, and then we can pull it apart one more time and then fit some bolts in. I've only got, would you believe, 3 out of the 4 bolts I need. They're the right thread pitch and everything. They're just a 10 mil metric. I've got 2 that are the same, and I've got a 3rd one that's shorter. So I'll have to go for a trip to the shops and make sure they all work. The only other problem is, how am I going to get these spaces in there? Because you can't get your fingers in there when you're trying to put the torque converter and everything on. Tensile strength is high enough. So they're a 8.8 tensile strength bolt, and I'm pretty sure the factory ones are only 9.8 or something. So I went and looked in the book. Actually, I went and saw Gary on the torque settings for all these bolts, and the crank only needs about 120 foot-pound, and these ones that go into the torque converter only say 25, which doesn't make sense because the ones in the crank are 1/2 inch and these are only 3/8. Well, these are 10 mil, but I mean, because the crank and the motor is all imperial, like UNC bolts and UNF in some cases, but the transmission is all metric, just to confuse the crap out of everyone. So lucky I've got a mixture of everything. Split these apart and have them ready to put in as spaces. I've just got to work out how I'm gonna stick them to the torque converter. Let's pull this motor transmission separate one more time, because I just love doing it. Anyway, here we go. Okay, so this is what I'm meaning about a spacer. So here's the little spacers that I've just made. There's 4 of them, and that's the hole. These are the new, they're the 4 new holes that I've created for this torque converter. And here's one here in place. They're the little blocks that are standard welded and balanced to the torque converter. So you could just imagine that basically I'm doing an extension of the current block, if that makes sense. So they're precise enough, the hole in the center is precise enough that the bolt just fits through nice and neatly. It's not a wobbly fit or anything, you know, like a normal washer is. So it's not a wobbly fit, it's nice and precise. And so the bolt is still strong enough to be able to pull, like just imagine the flex plates there. And the torque converter is going to be in the right location. It's not too far out and disengaging from the lube pump, the oil pump for the converter, for the transmission, sorry. So the lube pump won't be disengaged. So that's the theory. So now I've just got to work out, do I weld it on there similar to the welds that are there, or do I just put a little tack on the outside? Because what I do on one I've got to do on all of them, so I don't really want to have to get out there and measure exactly the right amount of weld. And so maybe I might just put a bit of araldite on there and pull the bolts in. Like, it sounds kind of funny just putting a bit of glue in there, but it only has to hold it there until I put it all together. That shouldn't be too hard. So I'll just pop a bit of glue on there and we'll be golden. So that's what I was talking about. I had to make a spacer for that to fit. Just imagine that back there. So you can still undo it. It's still there. It's still going to spin the torque converter. The center locator, it actually locates on that, not the center spigot. It locates on the big one, which fits in here, not the center part. Works out perfectly. Even with that spacer, it still locates with tons of space. So tons of room, sorry. It's quite a deep thing in there, so we're all good. No movement. Let's do that. Or maybe, okay, if all else fails and you see me pulling out the welder, you know the glue didn't work. So I'm just going to put a couple little tacks, or just a tack. It only has to have one tack there to hold it while I actually put it all together and bolt it up. After that, the tack has no other purpose. So let's pop that together. Here we go. Okay, so here's something that if you've got big balls, you should try and do when you're doing balancing. Firstly, get the wife's kitchen scales and then actually use them and take them back without her knowing. So she won't know. It'll all be good. They don't have to be perfectly accurate, but within a gram would be nice, and that's what these ones are. So let's balance these little things, eh? Here we go. 4 brand new bolts. They're all the same, brand newies, and the little spacers are numbered 1 to 4. So we're just going to use the old kitchen scales. Now it only goes to the whole gram. It doesn't go to any decimal places or anything. So it's not 100% accurate, but it's within a gram, so that should be fine. So first thing, we'll just whoop on the bolts. 23, or was that 22? Just thinking about it. So 23, 23, 23. Now these should be the same anyway, being manufactured. 23. So the bolts are all correct. So they're all the same. Little spacers. Number 1. 42. 42 after a second. That one's 42. And the last one, 41. Of course. Now it's 40. Make up your mind. I wonder how good the repeatability is. 41. Let's just try them all again. Now that one's 41 as well. What is it, just thinking about how heavy it is? It's 42. That's 43. Oh, these are really good scales. Oh, no, it's 42 now. So that one's bordering 42 to 43. So what I will do is give, because number 3 is just touching between 41 to 42, I'll give it just a slight. I'm going to use the old flappy disc just to knock a little bit off the heavier ones. That's all you can do unless you try and weld a bit on the others. But then whether you realise it or not, if you add heat to it, I was thinking about, I'll just put a tack weld on each one if they're lighter. But the heat will actually change the weight as well. So we won't do that. I'm going to just do a little touch off this one to try and get them all to 41. That's definitely a 41. This one's between 41 to 42. If we had a decimal place on the balance, it would be a bit more accurate. So I'll do a touch off number 3, and just to see where these other ones are, because this one's number 1 is 43 to 42, because it thinks about it. So I'll set you guys up on the tripod and just do a little bit of a touch up and on those couple and see where it comes up. Now the thing I have to be mindful of is when you heat these up, it does change the weight. Not by a dramatic amount, but it might be enough to give me an incorrect reading. So I'll have to let them cool in between each go. Okay, so there we go. We have all 4 with repeatability to 41 grams. All done. Now those spaces and all the bolts are balanced. So let's go and glue all these on, eh? Let's see how we go with the glue. Okay, so I've got them all the spaces bolted down with the proper bolts and just a couple of washers so the bolts don't bottom out, and they're all tight and they're all feel the same all the way around. Everything's all good from what I can see, and got a bit of cardboard under it so I don't make a mess. So here's the old hot glue gun. I was going to use Aridite, but it only needs to be there for however long it takes me to bolt it up. I've heard good stories about this hot glue gun. It's been told that it's just like weld. I'll turn the old hot glue gun on. It's apparently pretty good. It's, you know, as strong as a weld or a tack, you know, yet to be seen. A couple little squirts of the hot glue gun and see how we go, eh? So I'll stick you guys up on the tripod and put a dollop on all of these. So here we go. Okay, the old hot glue gun, she's ready. So here we go. I better shield my eyes. Apparently it's really good. Hang on, here we go. Hang on, about to pull the trigger. There we go. Oh wow, look at that. It does look like a weld. That's bloody amazing. Plain old hot glue gun. I think I'll do the other 4. Then we'll be laughing. I mean, that's the best glue I've ever seen in my life. Oh, this has got to be worth patenting. I wonder if someone else has done that. Well, there we go. All glued on. So I'll undo those bolts. I'm kind of thinking that I can actually put it in place for the last time. I should be able to, a litre of oil in there, then chuck it in, and then put it back into place, and then put the motor back in. I mean the motor back bolted up to it, hopefully for the last time. That'd be nice. Anyway, so let's get into that, eh? Good old Dex 3. So I've got about 500 mils, about half a litre, a metric litre in there. That should be heaps. 3. All in, space is located. Okay, a bit hard to see, but There it is. There's the hole just below that block. There it is, there's the hole, and there's the block. I'll just give this a turn. And you can see there's no gap between the torque converter and the flex plate. So that should be all good. I'll do some bolts up. We're away. You probably noticed I used the old, it's an impact driver, not a rattle gun. It's an impact driver that I did to do up these bolts. So it's fairly low, and you know, I highly recommend being exceptionally careful not to, you know, try and pull this really tight together, because you can break off these parts of the bell housing. So be exceptionally careful. That's why I didn't use a rattle gun. I just used the old impact driver. Little old Ryobi one. It's not a big amount of impact. And now I'll just put the spanner on it and make sure it's firm enough, you know, to FT specs. The transmission is connected to the motor again, for good this time, I think, hopefully, if we don't do any other damage. So I'll do those bolts up in the torque converter there, and then we can place it into the chassis. So here we go. Okay, they're all finger tight. Now get a spanner on it. I'll get a ring spanner. All the bolts all torqued up to factory specifications, of course. Okay, we're all bolted up, everything's all done. Now let's try and re-sling this so the motor doesn't drop off the edge of the bench. Get the excavator to drop it in. So here we go. Yeah, so there we go. It's all back into place. Torque converter is all sorted and bolted up to the flex plate and all back into place. Now all I've got to do is the tail shafts, which will be in the next video, and then we might start working on trying to do some important stuff like getting it running. Maybe brakes, maybe fuel, I don't know. Anyway, a few other things. So guys, thanks for watching, and if you like this video, give us a thumbs up, that'd be awesome. And if you haven't already and you saw value in this video on how to adapt a transmission to a different flex plate or different motor, give us a subscribe if you like for future videos. There's plenty of them coming, and we'll catch you on the next one. See ya.